Hey everyone, it's Mikki here. You're listening to Wikipedia, and this week on the podcast, I'm stoked to bring you the conversation I had most recently with Dr. Cliff Harvey. So Cliff is a bit of a fan favourite, and this week we dive into the fascinating world of medicinal mushrooms. Of course, Cliff and I have, briefly touched on the topic in other podcasts that we've done together, but this is the first one where we do a bit more of a deep dive. So we unpack what sets these functional fungi apart from the everyday mushrooms we eat, their rich history in traditional Chinese and Ayurvedic medicine, and the incredible health benefits they offer. So whether you're curious about their role in boosting the immune system, supporting athletic performance, or even improving gut health, Cliff shares insights on the bioactive compounds, adaptogenic properties, and the latest research in this field. Plus, we explore practical tips for incorporating mushrooms into your diet and some of Cliff's favourite products, sourcing high-quality products, and understanding the growing trend of functional beverages like mushroom coffee. Just to remind you all about Cliff Harvey, PhD, is New Zealand's expert on the effects of a ketogenic diet in a healthy population. But he is so much more than that. He has been helping people to live healthier, happier lives and to perform better since starting in clinical practice way back in the late 1990s. And over this time, he has been privileged to work with many Olympic, professional, Commonwealth and other high-performing athletes alongside Gen Pop. He has also worked with many people to overcome the effects of chronic and debilitating health conditions. Along the way, he has founded or co-founded many successful businesses in the health, fitness and wellness space, including the Nutrition Store Online and Holistic Performance Institute, New Zealand's leading certification and diploma for health, nutrition, health coaching and performance that has many of the world experts teaching on the course. So students are always learning from the best. Cliff has over 20 years experience as a strength and nutrition coach, and in addition to his PhD research, he's a registered clinical nutritionist, qualified naturopath, and holds a diploma in fitness training and health coaching and patient care. So you can find Cliff over at cliffharvey.com and the Holistic Performance Institute. Before we crack on into the show, I would like to remind you that the best way to support this podcast is to hit the subscribe button on your favourite podcast listening platform. That increases the visibility of Wikipedia in amongst literally thousands of other podcasts that are out there. So more people can get to learn from the experts I have on the show, like Dr. Cliff Harvey. All right, team, enjoy this conversation. Hey, Cliff, been a minute?
It has. It's not unfamiliar though. I think we've been here before.
I know. And in fact, one of the not the primary reason why I wanted to talk to you, but in fact, Hubster noticed. He's like, I haven't had an episode from Cliff lately. What's going on? And I'm like, oh, we keep meaning to, and I just keep forgetting to just send that email because you're always so available, which I really appreciate.
We're probably exhausting my knowledge base now.
Oh, tapping out? Are you tapping out? Is that what you're saying?
Nah, never.
You've done all that you can.
I'm sure there's something else I can talk about. Dog breeds or the Malian Empire in Africa, something like that.
Possibly. Oh, I mean, we'll stick to also a bit of your zone of genius here. Notwithstanding, you're probably a zone of genius in those areas as well. But one of the things that we haven't delved into, which my friend Matt, and I am sure you've met Matt before actually, emailed me to get connected with you about it, is mushrooms, and not the culinary mushroom, but mushrooms as a therapeutic, mushrooms and their therapeutic properties. So I thought that would be a great topic for us to dive into.
Yeah, sounds good. It sounds like it's all spontaneous, but you had asked me about this previously. It's like, oh yeah, we can talk about that today.
I know. There was a tinge of a surprise. Oh yeah, I could do that. I could talk about mushrooms. I mean, we could totally talk about dog breeds, but we'll move on to that if this is a too short, because people like a bit of you, Cliff. So I know that they'll be super excited that that we'll have a good decent chunk of your time sort of delving into this and others. First up though, I mean, you and I were just talking about recovering from some of this swing season, bugs and stuff that are going around. Did mushrooms feature in some of your regime to get better? Did you even bother? Like, did you do anything extra outside of your usual regime? When I say regime, I don't think that that you have a regime per se, but to help you get better, or what?
I kind of do have a regime, Mick, because I'm a creature of habit. So I tend to just do the same things each and every day. But this time around, no, I didn't really use any supplements extensively apart from just my daily stuff. And that's just been a bit of a process lately as I think we've talked about this before. I've really pared back my supplement regimen because I like to do that occasionally, just really stick to the basics. And then if I want to throw a few things in here and there to try them out, I sort of build back from there rather than having this sort of, increasing compendium of supplements that you're taking, because we can all get excited about various things and end up taking 100 different supplements. But I've really been cutting back to the basics. It's a lot of that's been very holistic in that sense as well, because I've been really focusing on the idea of physical culture. And it's like that old school, weightlifting side of thing that I'm into, which used to, back in the early days, encapsulate all the things we would now think of as holistic health, sleep and stress and, weightlifting and all those types of things. They're all involved with physical culture. And as part of that whole exercise for myself, I've really been cutting back to the basics. So good basic training, good basic food, just a real basic supplement regimen. And it's been interesting because a lot of the podcasts that I've been on lately and a lot of the writing I've been doing, all those types of things have all been sort of geared towards that get back to basics stuff. But having said that, a lot of those podcasts I've been on recently, I just haven't been at 100% because I've been sleep deprived, sick, brain fog. So one thing that I do certainly use, though, acutely and sometimes chronically as well, is, lion's mane is probably my favorite mushroom because I find it, for me at least, it has really apparent benefits for my cognition. So that's one thing that I often do throw in there. Bella's, been a bit under the weather as well, as have the kids. And so she will quite often use chaga and things like that when she starts to feel run down. So it's always part of what we've got circulating around. But I sort of, like every supplement that's not part of my real core, I will use it more or less depending on how I'm feeling at the time.
Oh, super interesting, Cliff. First of all, I've seen that you've been on a number of other amazing podcasts, because of course Wikipedia is quite amazing. And then this is like a complete removal from the back to basics, I suppose, theme of the others. But you and I chat about this stuff all of the time, and particularly on the podcast. And I think one of the reasons why I was super keen to talk to you more specifically about mushrooms is because that's something that you and I haven't really delved into, and I know you've got such a knowledge in the area, and you even just sort of, mentioned lion's mane and mentioned chaga, and I've certainly understand some of the, I think, cognitive benefits, I suppose, of lion's mane. I wouldn't know where else it would be beneficial, and whether it would be something that someone might use every day. And of course, we hopefully will just delve a little bit into that. But chaga, like all of the other mushrooms, seem to fall into this. I'm unsure of their application in real life, actually, and if these are things which people ideally should be sort of looking at implementing every single day. Should it be just part of their everyday regime, or is it a bit like you can sort of bring them in under particular circumstances? Like you mentioned, you and Bella have been sort of under the weather. You mentioned the kids. Is it contraindicated for kids to take something like the mushroom supplements? Or is it actually, so what's the difference between eating your mushrooms that you get from the supermarket and buying these sort of more medicinal mushrooms? I guess, let's start there.
It's a really good question, because I think that points to a lot of our sort of compartmentalization fallacies that we have in the modern world. Mushrooms of various types have been used as food and medicine for a long, long time. They found mushrooms in the pouch of Otzi the Iceman, the frozen Paleolithic man. It wasn't Paleolithic, but yeah, around that sort of time, they found that frozen man in the Swiss Alps. They now suspect that even forerunner hominins like Neanderthal man used mushrooms, possibly medicinally, but certainly as food. So we basically had them as food components and medicine for our entire human existence. And we often separate out nowadays the medicinal mushrooms from what we just consider like edible mushrooms, which most people just consider to be that field mushroom, right? Or the Agaricus campestris, Agaricus mysporus, those portobello, Swiss browns, all that kind of stuff, all the same species thereabouts. But even those have quite pronounced health properties. There's good evidence showing that they reduce excessive oxidation, reduce inflammation, have cardiometabolic benefits. So a lot of broad crossover benefits for health that we see from all the medicinal mushrooms as well. Maybe not so pronounced in certain areas, but certainly still appreciable. And there's other cool elements to that as well. They did a really cool study where they substituted beef for mushrooms. Now, I'm not suggesting someone does that because obviously beef has protein, all that kind of stuff. But what they found was that substituting the same volume of mushroom for beef, people didn't then eat more to compensate for the reduced calories. The volume was enough to basically satisfy them. So that's a really cool concept because people could put, say, if they're making up a stew, still have your beef, still have your protein, but they could throw mushrooms in there as well, which we know are going to be very satiating. So help people to auto-regulate their energy intake. A lot of the other medicinal mushrooms are edible too. And we have a long history of using them, like I said, as food and medicine. And we often think about that nowadays. Again, we have this idea that mostly that comes from, say, Asian cuisine, or it comes from maybe Ayurvedic medicine. But mushrooms have been used, of various types have been used as food and medicine through basically every culture, from Europe through Asia, through North America. And many of the same species or similar species have been used in a similar fashion. So when we look at what we now consider the common medicinal mushrooms, because I really focus on those common ones, we'll see that some are not that edible as food. If you're looking at the polypores like turkey tail or chaga, they're basically woody fungi that grow on the side of trees, right? And so really, if you're using them in cooking, they need to be extracted or ground down, dried and ground down into powder, and then they might be able to be used in broths, mushroom broths and soups and bases and things. But most of the others, shiitake, lion's mane, and obviously then the common, more commonly known edible mushrooms, they're all great. They taste fantastic. And even some of the less common ones that people don't necessarily think of as either food or medicine that can be commonly foraged are great eating as well. We are not doing it so much anymore, but in past years, we used to forage every mushroom season for native oyster mushrooms and, slippery jacks, those types of forest mushrooms that you can find. And we just go out and find them in the bush, bring them home, chuck them on a pizza. Oh. Great. So there's a lot of crossover there, and there's a lot of crossover not just in terms of what's edible versus what's medicinal, but also in terms of the medicinal properties that cross over with these mushrooms. There's also a lot that we don't know. There's a lot that remains undiscovered.
Hey, a couple of questions then. So the likes of the lion's mane and shiitake, are they growing? I'm so ignorant. Do they grow in New Zealand?
Which ones?
Like lion's mane and shiitake?
Yes. There are native species that are from the same genus, so they're not necessarily the same species. But yeah, we have native lion's mane here. Hericium novazelandiae, I think, is the native one. And so there is a native lion's mane. Now, a lot of purists will say, well, it's not lion's mane because they haven't always identified exactly the same chemical compounds. And because of that, there hasn't always been the same, we can't always apply the same research because most of it is done using Hericium erinaceus, which is your sort of classic lion's mane that's found through, Eurasia, North America. And they're isolated, some of those isolated chemicals like erinacine A, some of the hericinones have been quite well studied. So we understand that some of those have specific effects. But that does also speak to some of the challenges with that type of research, because I think you and I would both agree that it's really important to isolate chemicals to demonstrate plausibility for various outcomes through in vitro, animal in vivo, human in vivo studies, looking at that whole sort of research process. But within herbal medicine, within which mycological medicine broadly falls, even though they're obviously not herbs, they're a whole different thing, it's really important to recognize that there are a large number of chemicals that are having potentially synergistic effects or potentially different effects that are still cooperative in some respect with respect to outcomes. So, if you've got a whole bunch of compounds that might be potentially anti-inflammatory or that might help with endogenous antioxidant function or that might be neurogenic or whatever it happens to be, to isolate down too much is very much that pharmaceutical model that doesn't always fit with herbal medicine. Because when we look at fungi, I mean, they're incredibly complex organisms. We're talking about tens of thousands of genes coding for hundreds of thousands of chemicals within fungi. And there's no way we have isolated and identified all of those, right? And so we tend to pick out certain things and study them, but there's way more going on.
I've heard someone talk about fungi. I usually say fungi until I talk to you, and then I immediately switch to fungi. As almost, I remember them talking about, that mushrooms grow up from the ground, but underneath the ground, there's this really complex network of cells and roots and nerves, and they're like it's like a whole other world under the ground of, I don't know, of like mushroom life or something. Like it's, and I can't recall, there was someone I listened to on Joe Rogan talked all about mushrooms, and I can't recall who that is. You might know who this is, but
it was probably Paul Stamets.
Yes.
And you should definitely get him on the podcast because he's a really interesting guy. Now, some academics are a little bit critical of Paul Stamets, and I don't understand why. I think it's probably a little bit of, that academic superiority, because Paul Stamets, to my knowledge, has a bachelor's degree in science, fairly non-specific, but he went on and basically as a citizen scientist and became one of the greatest mycologists ever, right? He's discovered so many things and he's patented so many things, and he's such a great advocate for mycological medicine along with other things. And so I think he's probably been one of the people who has pushed this to the forefront more than any other. So really interesting guy, and his knowledge of all of that stuff is, far and above most people, myself included. My knowledge is really with respect to the common supplemental mushrooms and their use in clinical practice, because I became really interested in mushrooms as medicine, also mushrooms as ergogens, way back in probably the early 2000s when I started reading about cordyceps. And the research wasn't that great at that point, but it sparked a bit of an interest. And then it was of interest to me that we didn't really study mushrooms that much as part of our herbal medicine materia medica when I was studying naturopathy and herbal medicine. And that surprised me a little bit because it tended to reject the long history of use of mushrooms, especially from the European perspective, because they were seen mostly as things that we used in Asian medicinal systems. But that's a fairly recent thing. And I think part of that is that there's probably been quite a lot of fear around mushrooms because, yes, some of them are quite poisonous, toxic, can kill you, right? And there's misidentification. The little brown mushrooms are often seen to be the most dangerous. So let's say you're out, obviously we shouldn't do this because it's illegal, but let's say someone were out picking psilocybin mushrooms. It's very easy to mistake them for toxic lookalikes. So I think that sort of led to, in European cultures, a much greater resistance to using mushrooms. But it was much later that I started getting word of the benefits of particularly lion's mane. And this was probably going back 15 or so years ago. And so I at the time I was working with some traumatic brain injury clients who had been either serious concussions from rugby or boxing, or people who had been involved in car accidents. And we started using some combined protocols of various things, MCTs in some cases, exogenous ketones, and lion's mane. So we're really combining MCTs and lion's mane with a lot of these people and noticing some pretty pronounced effects. So that really kickstarted my reinterest in mushrooms as medicine. Started looking into it a lot more, obviously, because of that. So yeah, to get back to your point, because that was a bit of a tirade, fungi are so critical for ecology, right? And when we look at a mushroom, it's the fruit. It's like looking at an apple off the tree. The body of the fungi is, in some cases, enormous. The largest organisms on the planet are fungi.
Under the ground. And
they grow, for kilometers and kilometers under the ground. And they're critical for decomposition of organic matter. They're critical for providing other nutrients to, say, forest systems. They're critical for communication between trees. That's something that's been discovered. And so these are all things that I guess are only just emerging in the consciousness. They've probably also been critical for development of humans as a species. This is something you've probably heard about, and it is a bit fringe, but I don't discount it. Have you heard of the stoned ape theory or the stoned ape hypothesis?
Oh, no, tell.
So this is a hypothesis that I believe was formulated by Dennis McKenna, the ethnobotanist. Really, really cool dude. And he purports that back in the early days of human development, the consumption of psychedelic mushrooms was possibly a factor in the development of language, creative thinking, very much the brain explosion that humans had, because it's unlike any other species, really. That's why we don't consider ourselves animals. Of course we're animals, but we're so distinct because there's all these other things that we do. The fact that we're talking over a screen separated by, it's nuts when you compare it to all the other species on the planet. And so that hypothesis, at least, is that psychedelics probably played a role, or possibly played a role, I should say, in that development and that brain explosion in which we developed linguistics and art, culture, creativity.
Yeah. Oh, crazy. Cliff, I want to dive in actually to one of the points one of the things you were talking about in your own interest. And first with cordyceps. So what is it that we know about the components of that particular mushroom? Why is it something that we would look to include? Why were you interested? And has your initial interest back in 2000s has that just continued? Has what you thought to be true borne out, I suppose? Do we understand better some of those health benefits?
We do understand. We understand a lot more, and there's beginning to now be a lot more research published, but it's still just not enough. The last time I looked, just using it as an example, the last time I looked, there were no human trials on reishi for sleep. There may be now, because it might have been a little while since I looked, but we were looking to do research specifically looking at reishi and sleep for humans, because there have been no research in that space. There had been some animal research. And the reason I bring that up is because reishi is so commonly used to aid sleep. So anecdotally, we probably have thousands, millions of people who have used it for sleep and reported benefits, but there hasn't really been the randomized trials that we need to really confirm that. And that's a bit of a characteristic of the research, is that there is really promising research around, cancer, around immunity, inflammation, a whole bunch of areas that crosses over a lot of these mushrooms, but we don't always have enough clinical trials to really say, yes, this absolutely works in humans. But we can certainly suspect that there are effects. When we talk about the, what's in them that's causing the effect, we do have research which isolates certain compounds. So for cordyceps, there are various cordycepins, for example. But again, I don't think we can always separate those chemicals out from the triage effect of all the various chemicals. Although we are seeing some cool research coming out. Like I just read a study this morning, and it was a trial, randomized controlled trial, comparing it was only, was it 300 or 3.4? It was really low. I should really remember that. It was a low dose anyway of erinacine A, so an isolated compound, or it was lion's mane potentized to a certain very small amount of erinacine A, looking at cognitive outcomes and significant effects for improving memory, possible effects on mood, improving gut microbial diversity. So it was kind of cool because we do see in some of these studies that very small amounts of the purported active compounds do have outcome effects. But again, I think we're seeing better results, and we tend to see that through herbal medicine as well, with the whole, the whole plant, the whole fungi, and all the various compounds that are in it. So cordyceps, as a really good example, we would say that it's likely that it improves exercise performance, but we don't have enough data to really say unequivocally. There have been a couple of trials showing it improves cardiovascular capacity during exercise, so that's pretty cool. There's animal evidence to suggest that it increases testosterone, but that hasn't been demonstrated in humans yet, and most of those types of outcomes we tend to not see from supplements. And whether they would have any meaningful functional outcome, we don't really know, because, as you know, small increases in testosterone within a normal range don't tend to do much for people. We tend to only see outcomes from, say, herbal medicine and testosterone when people are hypogonadal. Having said that, though, if I'm working with athletes and they want to try mushrooms, we will typically say, well, give cordyceps a go and see how you feel, right? And if you notice that it improves a lot of people notice that it improves their alertness, they feel stimulated, they feel like their perceived exertion is reduced. So yeah, I mean, for a lot of these things, we do kind of need to try it, because if we don't have all the data we need to unequivocally say, yes, it's likely to work, there's still a role for N of one experimentation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I'm super interested in, it sort of reminds me of the probiotic field, in that you've got different strains, you've got different families of probiotics, and there's been many strains that have been studied for different outcomes. But some of the people who sort of work in the field are like, look, actually just across the board, like maybe we've been a bit too granular and actually just need to step back and think, hey, their ability to modulate the immune system is actually the big driving reason for why these are beneficial, not that this particular strain is going to help with this particular health outcome. Is that similar to, do you think that, I mean, if you had to have some sort of crystal ball and could look into the future in 20 years from now, looking at the research, could we say that about mushrooms in some of their health benefits, albeit some they may also help particular things, but across the board they're just a good thing to potentially include?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's an area that is really being pushed now, particularly within herbal and mycological medicine. And I think it's a positive thing.
Yeah.
And we can see that with other things too, like cannabis. The broad range of cannabinoids, they're going to have different properties, slightly different outcomes, but in combination, we're tending to see the best results now. For example, CBD tends to, based on the research, mitigate a lot of the negative outcomes that people associate with THC, like neurocognitive, like negative effects on neurocognition and things like that. CBD pretty much tends to sort that out on a population basis. Obviously, individually, we have to sort of take it case by case. But similarly, there are a lot of positive effects from lots of different things that would come through a more traditional approach to eating that people just don't really think about, because they're always trying to find the silver bullet.
Yeah.
And I think that there is absolutely a role for isolating, synthesizing particular compounds, because if we're looking at specific disease outcomes or development of drugs, pharmaceuticals, then yeah, that is important, really important. But on a more basic level, for general health, maybe broad crossover outcomes, even going beyond health, as we've talked about before, when we're not just looking to eliminate a pathology and get someone back to being a mouse on the wheel as a productive member of society, and actually looking beyond that to human potential, purpose, passion, those types of things, then we need to, I think, look more broadly at what can encourage that.
Yeah.
So from mushrooms, there's lots of different compounds that tend to have a range of outcomes, and it crosses over a lot of the mushrooms as well. We tend to see across the board from all the medicinal mushrooms improvements in oxidative status, inflammatory status. We're seeing, in vitro at least, a lot of anti-cancer effects from all of them. Lion's mane, cordyceps, turkey tail, chaga, you can't really disassemble it. Similarly, when we talk about herbal medicine, I find that really fascinating because this can be a really good intro. Mushrooms can be a really good intro to the discussion about herbal medicine too, because again, people want to isolate down. But can we say that the effects of sage on cognition are down to rosmarinic acid? No, we can't. I mean, it's more than that. There are all these different chemicals that are helping. And most people aren't aware of the benefits of, say, just as an example, sage for cognition. It's one of the better demonstrated outcomes from herbal medicine. So if we were looking at nootropics, we'd say, well, from my point of view, sage is cool, lion's mane's cool, right? But people don't necessarily recognize that because they think about mushrooms as being the common mushrooms they eat, which don't do anything, but they do. They think then about the medicinal mushrooms, which are weird and esoteric.
Yeah.
And they think about herbs as just being stuff that flavors food. But food, medicine, functional outcomes, these things are all wrapped up together.
The one mushroom you didn't mention was magic mushrooms. Is that what we call them?
Oh, you do? Psilocybin, yeah.
yeah. And same family, same thing, but just more enhanced brain benefits? Like, is lion's mane, in the right dose, would lion's mane have a similar effect on the brain? Or do we know?
Probably not. I mean, the crossover really with those is the potential neuroplastic and neuroregenerative properties of, say, psilocybin mushrooms and hericium mushrooms. But the psychoactive effects are pretty specific to those psilocybin compounds that are in magic mushrooms. So that's quite distinct. And that's a nice thing to know because I think a lot of the effects on neurocognition, neuroplasticity, neurogenesis, we're really seeing strong demonstration for that with the lion's mane mushrooms. Now, people suspect that as well from psilocybin, but I think the outcomes from microdosing those magic mushrooms are probably a little bit equivocal at the moment. But the reality is most people don't. I mean, some people want to go on a heroic journey, right? And all power to them. And in many places that's legal now to use psilocybin mushrooms medicinally or recreationally. But a lot of people don't want that either. But they could probably get a lot of the neurocognitive benefits from taking something that's not psychoactive in the same way, like lion's mane.
And Cliff, you mentioned I think it was 2008 or 9, I might be wrong about the year, that you were interested, you had clients who had traumatic brain injury, albeit, through various reasons, and you were interested looking at lion's mane and at potentially exogenous ketones and MCT oils. So can we talk a little bit about lion's mane, the role in the brain and cognition, and just teaming up of those two? Was there something superior about the way lion's mane is delivered if it's on the back of ketones or MCT? Do we know about that kind of combination?
Yeah, I don't think there's any particular benefit or additive benefit necessarily of having the lion's mane with the MCTs. The reason for the MCTs was more to improve that neuronal fueling, with obviously, and I know that you know this, but a lot of the listeners won't, with traumatic brain injuries, we get a number of things happening for which MCTs can really help.
Yeah. Like
distortions of the blood-brain barrier where increased ingress of fatty acids can cause hypoxia in the brain. And so there's resulting neural damage from that. So it's not just about the concussion, it's post-concussive effects that result from blood-brain barrier distortion and the inability of certain neurons that have been damaged to optimally use glucose, which is obviously the preferred fuel for the brain. And so when we have MCTs and increased ketogenesis, increased ketones, we can not only supplant some of that fatty acid damage, we can also provide increased fuel for those neurons that they can use. There are then lead-on effects from that, like increased adenosine in the brain, which is relaxatory, improved glutamate GABA balance, so there's less excitotoxicity, which again breaks down or destroys some of those neurons. So that's sort of the reason for having that side of things. It's more the metabolic aspects. Whereas with the lion's mane, the key thing there is that it's neurogenic. So it increases brain-derived neurotrophic factors, which also can be improved by ketosis as well. But various nerve growth factors are increased with lion's mane. So we have strong evidence, because we have a good research pathway, I guess, in vitro, animal in vivo, and human in vivo evidence showing that, yes, it does encourage neurogenesis, probably also neuroplasticity, and improves some other aspects of brain chemical balance. So really positive stuff. And it's one of those things where, because the evidence from my point of view is pretty strong, this is going to sound like a really shitty pun, but I didn't mean it to be. It's a no-brainer, I think, in that post-concussive situation to use lion's mane. Now, there are other things that we also add into that now. We also refer our clients out to cannabis clinics, because cannabis, particularly CBD, is also neuroprotective. So there are more things that have been added into that sort of protocol now. But the key hallmarks of the protocol would still be MCT and lion's mane. And we've had really good results with that. And it's one of those areas, there are two areas that I regret not having published case studies, or three actually, that I regret not publishing case studies in, but it still might happen. One is that. The other is the use of lion's mane as part of a combined protocol for ADHD.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, now that's super cool, because I've had several clients who had been diagnosed with ADHD as adults, as a lot of people are nowadays, and have felt quite burnt out from Williden.
Yes.
The stimulatory drugs that are usually prescribed. And so we explored using lion's mane with tyrosine and theanine and got really good results. So a couple of clients were able to wean off Williden, and their reported benefits, at least, were that they got similar benefits, no adverse effects, with broader crossover health benefits. We also worked with a couple of young people actually with ADHD and who were with autism spectrum conditions. And a lot of times with kids who have ASC, there are various food aversions, and sometimes it's difficult to have them supplementing.
Yeah.
So they won't often take supplements. They have a more restricted diet. And so it can be difficult sometimes to get good outcomes, because you'd really like them to take a multi, or you'd like them to take something else. And in a couple of cases, the only thing that could be done was to add some lion's mane extract to, say, their drinks, add it to their orange juice or something like that, things they're prepared to have. And in both cases that we did that, it's only 2 cases, but in both cases that we did that, the parents reported back it's like night and day. It made a massive difference. Now they're case studies, right? So we can't draw too much from it, but it does mesh with the existing research. Improved cognition, improved memory and processing, improved dopamine levels, things like that. So there are a lot of things occurring there. And as you and I have discussed before, case studies are a cool part of the research process because they're hypothesis generators. So now we have some strong hypotheses that we could potentially go on and do research on, or through, promoting some of these cases through forums like this. Other researchers might pick up on that and say, hey, I might do a trial on that.
Yeah.
And so we start to expand the knowledge base.
Yeah, for sure. And even other clinicians who might be research oriented, hopefully they all are, but they would see things like this and try it themselves too, like that's how people develop skills and learn more in this space.
Yeah, and I was talking with another academic yesterday over coffee about this. We both agreed that we need to have more practitioners publishing case studies.
Yeah.
Because once you get a whole bunch of case studies saying the same thing, it makes the evidence basis stronger. It's still not a randomized controlled trial, but it makes the anecdote more compelling when you have hundreds, thousands of anecdotes.
Yes.
Or you can compile that data and start to publish case series or, combined practitioner resource type studies. That's kind of cool stuff. And it's often a critical step, not just for hypothesis generation, but it's also a critical step to help indicate when certain things as part of a combined protocol can be useful. Because, in clinical practice, we don't isolate things down to the same degree that we do when we're conducting a randomized controlled trial.
Yeah.
It's not like we say to our client, well, okay, you're just going to take 30 mils of MCT every day for the next 6 weeks. That's all we're going to do. Because, well, that would be useful because it really isolates things down.
It's not real life.
It's not going to give them enough benefit. Yeah.
No. I'll tell you something, Cliff, this is a bit of a tangent, but a couple of months ago I was just looking on PubMed and came across a new published paper looking at evidence-based guidelines for TBI and concussion and how we need to go about it nutritionally. And it was, I can't recall, it was from a guidelines group, maybe. I might be wrong about that. But anyway, I'll try and find the link and send it to you. It was pretty interesting. And it came down to the nutrients. And one of the major recommendations for this, for TBI, was to provide, like, immediately upon concussion, get those athletes, it was an athlete population, eating 500 grams of carbohydrate a day. And they had a couple of references, and their rationale for this was because glucose metabolism is impaired, so we need to dump a whole ton more glucose for it to be accessed for the brain for energy. So I read that and went, hang on, what is going on here? And then I looked at the references and I followed the chain, and there were 2 references. One of the references was talking about the hypoenergetic environment of the brain. So the brain just wasn't able to access energy, and it never mentioned anything about carbohydrate. That paper was talking particularly about calories, and bumping up calories could potentially help. The other reference, Cliff, was a round table discussion with Australian dietitians. I shouldn't throw Australia under the bus. With dietitians talking about what they would do if they had TBI. So it wasn't actually published literature. That was just a round table discussion of what to do if someone's got concussion. And that was used as a reference to build the case for dumping carbohydrate into the system. Both references were inappropriate, as you and I have talked about before offline, how this can occur. Yet doesn't that just, and this was published in a paper of guidelines for TBI, which just seemed totally against what I would have thought, the route that I would have taken, which is much more about what you're talking about with, NCTs and the rest.
Yeah. I mean,
and proves how shitty research is, actually, that something like that gets through the peer review process and the reviewers didn't pick up the lack of evidence to support that, basically.
Exactly, because, we would have to consider that for when the brain's functioning optimally, it can utilize that glucose that's inherently within the blood easily.
Yeah.
Now, we're not going to, someone might be hypoglycemic and that's going to be an issue. But assuming that most people are not going to be hypoglycemic per se, they're going to have enough glucose in the blood. So it's not really a provision problem, it's a reception problem. And this is why we have, though, that milieu of post-concussive effects. It's specifically because of things like that BBB distortion, hypoxia, damage to the glucose transporters. Like these things are critical, and just dumping more glucose into the system, I really don't think is necessarily going to help with that. It seems cavalier, and it's not really something that should be put into a guideline or position stand. In my point of view, it should really be a hypothesis generator again to say, well, we're going to take this group and compare them to placebo, or maybe compare them to a different intervention, have a comparator study and dump a whole truckload of glucose in them and see if it improves outcomes. But I think we have enough. There are certainly things that I think have stronger evidence than that, and with our athletes, we would typically suggest a couple of things, like talk to a specialist about maybe using CBD as a prophylactic because we know that there are benefits from that. A recent trial, really cool trial, one of the bigger causes of sort of chronic concussive effects is repeatedly hitting the ball in football and soccer.
Yeah.
Really cool study where one group was using cannabis medicine, the other on placebo, and the markers of concussive effects were drastically mitigated in the cannabis group. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
The neurogenic potential of lion's mane is fairly well recognized now. It's not really controversial. So that seems like a way better target. The known effects of ketones on that fueling mitochondrial metabolic aspect is very well known, right? So it's just like it's rejecting far more plausible hypotheses in favor of something that you're biased towards. And that, like you say, that's shitty science.
Yeah, and that's how it sort of came across, and for whatever reason in that sports arena, carbohydrate just gets the green light for almost everything, like it's the safest thing to do. That's just what they're going to do, and it seemed to me to be an incredibly bad idea, actually. But I'm not the one sitting there writing the paper, reviewing it, or pushing publish on that one. Cliff, so clearly I gave you a million questions and we went on a bit of a tangent, which I quite like. But what people will probably want to know, understandably, is if someone just has a bit of, let's say, brain fog, or they want to try it to see whether they get any sort of mental clarity, what kind of doses should we be looking at for lion's mane? Is it available, and is there a better way to take it, i.e. through a dropper like Life Cycle, which I've had in the past, Four Sigmatic do sachets? Do they have meaningful amounts in these products, or do we need to look elsewhere?
No, I think they do. I mean, we typically see the research fairly wide ranges of dose, and I don't think the optimal doses have been determined, But we typically say an effective dose would be somewhere north of 1 gram of lion's mane, or the other mushrooms as well. It seems to be fairly consistent. But let's take, Four Sigmatic coffee, for example. I think from memory around 400 milligrams of lion's mane in it. It still seems to at least give a benefit above and beyond just coffee. That might just be bias. It might just be, placebo effect. You're expecting it, whatever. But it does seem to have that effect. Now, I was surprised in this recent study, and I wish I could remember the exact dose. I think from memory, it was only 3.4 milligrams of erinacine A, which is a very small amount. That does suggest that the effective dose maybe isn't as high. And that's obviously not 3.4 milligrams of lion's mane. It's one compound from within it. But it does suggest that maybe lower doses than what people previously thought are going to have some bioactivity. So I think with respect to what people take, there are going to be different benefits from different modes of ingestion. For convenience, a lot of people love the coffees. And obviously they get that little whack of caffeine as well. It's actually not that much caffeine, surprisingly. And that's one of the interesting things, is that a lot of people report, I felt like I was stimulated to the same degree as if I had a normal coffee, but there's only about 40 mgs of caffeine in one of those. So maybe that suggests that there is something going on there. A lot of people really like the extracts, like the ones Life Cycle do, because it's super easy to just chuck them into a coffee or a smoothie or whatever. So I use the extracts a lot just for the ease of use. But I do also like the whole mushroom powders, because you do get some extra stuff there. Now, interestingly, I would have said, even if you asked me a couple of months ago, that for aspects like gut health, I would probably veer towards the whole mushroom, because it's going to have more beta-glucans and, the various polysaccharides and whatnot that are going to function as prebiotics. But one cool thing in that recent study is that erinacine A itself seemed to have an effect on gut microbiota. So that's kind of cool. And people don't realize that a lot of phytochemicals will help with gut health, and a lot of nutrients will as well. So it's not just about the, prebiotics resulting in improved gut health. But I think overall, the form doesn't matter too much. So to take what you can, what's convenient. In terms of what people should take, because there's such a broad crossover of benefits, you're probably going to get health benefits from any of the medicinal mushrooms that are broadly similar. But if you're wanting to focus specifically on something, then it's a little bit lazy, but we do have general defaults that we fall back on, right? I remember Bill Lagakos, who I think is a really cool scientist. I get on with him really well, and he publishes really cool stuff. He used to always say, lion's mane for the brain and reishi for everything else. And it's kind of true. You know, reishi is kind of seen as the great all-rounder of the mushroom world.
Yeah.
But in many respects, you know, shiitake could also fall into that realm. Turkey tail, you know, is very well known for its anti-cancer properties, but that also has broad crossover benefits for a lot of health outcomes. There's evidence to suggest it helps improve gut health and the microbiota as well. So that's kind of cool. Chaga, a lot of people use for immunity specifically. So if they're starting to feel run down or if they're sick, they use chaga. Now, chaga is not one that I would use every day because it's the food that is probably highest in oxalic acid of any.
Okay.
So if you're using a lot of chaga every day, you might end up with kidney stones or something horrible.
Yeah, it's good to know.
And obviously with the cognitive benefits, you know, lion's mane is something that people will default to for performance benefits, although lion's mane has performance benefits as well. It's been demonstrated in RCTs to reduce rates of perceived exertion and improve glycogen deposition. Cool stuff, right?
Yeah.
But cordyceps will typically be what people use for athletic purposes. But again, all of them cross over. So what do? We tend to have a range of extracts there, and I either just cycle through them, plugging some into smoothies or whatever, or if I feel I want a particular outcome, like before this, because I got 4 hours sleep last night because of the kids, I plugged some lion's mane into my coffee, and it helps with my cognition, I think. So
yeah, nice one.
There are some caveats, but because they've been used for so long as both food and medicine, we would say that broadly mushrooms are considered, you know, generally regarded as safe. But one of the areas that people should be aware of, and if they're looking to use higher doses, maybe they should do it under the care of a qualified practitioner, because they can reduce platelet aggregation. And so if, for example, people are consider taking it for the anti-cancer effects, if someone had a cancer that predisposed them to internal bleeding or some, you know, horrible outcome like that, they wouldn't necessarily want to do that without getting some good advice on it.
So it's the same. So I was actually going to ask you about contraindications. So that could be an issue for someone on blood thinners then as well?
Well, yeah, it could. It might be positive in that case, but you would certainly want to, like, it might be positive for the condition, but they would need to let the doctor know and maybe work with their doc and someone who's qualified in mycological medicine. So they would really want to find a naturopath or medical herbalist. I should caveat that, an evidence-based naturopath or medical herbalist, because a lot of them are quacks. And I'm a naturopath and medical herbalist, so I can say that.
And a quack as well. So
and a quack, yeah. One who is well experienced with mycological medicine.
Yeah, cool. Any other sort of contraindications with medicines or anything? And would lion's mane from that cognitive perspective impact negatively on sleep?
Good question. Because although we tend to see it improves cognition, you know, memory performance, those types of things, it's not stimulatory per se, so it doesn't really tend to affect sleep negatively. But one of the purported outcomes, and I'll have to look back and see if there's actually research on this or this is just a hypothesis, is that it improves REM sleep. So a lot of people actually take lion's mane before bed. Reishi, again, we talked about the anecdotes. A lot of people say that reishi improves sleep. There is animal evidence for that, and so a lot of people now for sleep combine reishi and lion's mane, because reishi tends to help them sleep better and longer. Lion's mane tends to encourage REM sleep, which is really important for a lot of our memory consolidation, you know, learning, those types of things. So yeah, they combine them for sleep. As far as other contraindications, again, they're generally seen as pretty safe. And so there don't tend to be a huge amount that I've seen pop up in the safety and sort of toxicology data. There are instances in the research of allergy, which is, common with most things. It's not common for people to have allergies to mushrooms, but it is one of those areas that, some people are allergic to various mushrooms. So, always want to be aware of those types of things. In terms of direct drug supplement interactions, you'd have to consider that on a case-by-case basis because, there's so many drugs out there and a lot of it hasn't been studied either. So we can't always be 100% sure.
Yeah. No, that makes good sense. Do you know, it's fascinating to me, the whole mushrooms themselves are quite fascinating. Like when you're out in the bush, and two of the most spectacular mushrooms I've seen, I'm sure they must be as poisonous as anything. One was bright blue with white polka dots. And this was in...
You hadn't taken any mushrooms before seeing that.
I hadn't taken any mushrooms. No, we were on a fast pack up to the top of Parongia. I'm trying to remember the track, but there's a hut, and it was a ghastly track that we did actually, and I hated it. But we saw. I've got a picture of a bright blue with white polka dot mushroom, and it just looked. It was stunning, actually, and I thought that's got to be poisonous. But it was the most spectacular thing. And another one is, of course, you see these ones are much more common. The bright orange, the yellow, like those ones. They've got to be poisonous as well, I'm sure. But I mean, they're
with the
gorgeous.
white spots.
Maybe.
So the common one that people refer to as a toadstool is Amanita muscaria, and that's the fly agaric, it's called fly agaric, or the scarlet flycap. So that's the red top mushroom, or it can be yellow, it can be orange with the white dots on it.
Yeah.
They're really interesting mushroom because apparently a lot of the mythology around Santa Claus, Father Christmas, was tied up with that. And shaman used to use that up in Scandinavia quite extensively, and they would feed it to the reindeer and then drink the urine because the reindeer were able to metabolize the toxic compounds, which I forget the name now, and so it became less toxic. And there are psychoactive effects from Amanita muscaria. It's not really similar to psilocybin per se. It's more a dreamy sort of feeling that people get. Now, one of the things that's been discovered more recently is it's very GABAergic. So that probably explains some of the sort of relaxatory effects. Now, I don't recommend that people do this because you need to have some fairly good knowledge of what to do, but it is possible to decarboxylate those toxic compounds and use Amanita muscaria. So it is used by some people as a GABAergic. It's used as a tea when it's properly processed, and so it can be very relaxing as well. It can be a really good compound for helping sleep. So it's not actually as dangerous as people say. You probably wouldn't kill yourself eating it, but you could get very sick if you just eat raw Amanita muscaria.
Yeah. Okay. I get concerned. My dad goes out foraging mushrooms to eat, and I'm always just a little bit concerned that he might accidentally pick up something super toxic and that'll be him. Hasn't happened yet, which is quite good, but I'd much prefer he sticks to like the supermarket variety, to be honest.
Well, that's one of the reasons why, I've really very much focused on the supplemental mushrooms, is because people know what they're going to get. Foraging is super fun, and it's really fun and interesting to learn how to identify mushrooms correctly. And I mean, I've been doing that for many years, but I, even having done it many years and, foraged a lot, eaten a lot of mushrooms from out of the bush, I don't feel confident enough to just do that without getting some sort of secondary opinion. So I tend to triangulate whenever even if I'm pretty confident, just as a cautious thing, I tend to triangulate what I'm doing. So I might take a picture of it and check it with Google Lens, but that's not enough because that will misidentify a lot. Then I'll also look at characteristics and go back to my field guides, and usually often also post a picture for mushroom experts in various groups. You can join groups on Facebook where there are mycologists who will, give you ID. And so that's kind of cool. You check it through a number of angles, but there is potential even with field mushrooms, you call them various agaricus species, section Zaptoderma, I think. They're the yellow stainers. So when people pick what they think are field mushrooms and they stain yellow where they've been cut or pulled off, it's likely that they're not your standard field mushroom that's edible. They're a more toxic version. Now, my understanding is they're not fatal per se, but they'll make people very sick. Yellow staining is not just the mushroom, it's also what you're going to throw up.
Yeah, oh gosh. And the way that you described what is required in order to get the double check that it is safe sounds like a lot of work. Maybe I'm lazy. Maybe that's why possibly I'm better off in the supermarket myself. And look, I would never pick anything out and go, oh yeah, I might eat this. Like, it's not really my nature, to be honest.
And there are some that I'm pretty confident with. If I'm in the bush looking at, Suillus luteus or Suillus granulatus, and, I know what that's going to look like, and I can ID that pretty well, bring that home, prepare it, chuck it on a pizza, no problem. A native oyster, there's no problem with that. We'd identify that pretty quickly. But yeah, there are enough lookalikes that even if people are fairly experienced, I think they want to always exercise caution. And for most people, just be safe. Like, just if you're looking for a particular benefit, then just buy it.
Yeah, totally. What about buttered mushrooms? Do you never? You've mentioned a couple of times now that you bring home your mushrooms and put them on pizza. I quite like bringing home mushrooms, albeit from the supermarket, and putting them in a pan with butter and salt.
Yeah, great. Absolutely, why not? Of course. I don't care how anyone eats it.
I was just getting the tick of approval from you, Cliff. I'm forever seeking your approval, so I'm pleased that I managed to get it as well here today on the podcast.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly, but I do vaguely remember reading somewhere that the method of preparation didn't really matter that much for getting the benefits from edible mushrooms. So whether people put them in stews or fried them up or used, dried them, even as far as extraction techniques, using water, alcohol, whatever, didn't seem to matter too much. There'd be slight variations in the compounds you're getting, but it didn't really seem to be that different.
Oh, amazing. And in fact, what you mentioned with regards to mushrooms' effect on satiety makes me think I need to start including them more in my diet plans for people. Protein and mushrooms, man. Actually, my protein-sparing modified fast days should probably become protein-sparing mushroom fast days. I might do that. Help people improve their satiety on their fasting mimicking diet.
Yeah, and you're also getting a whole bunch of other benefits too, right? So that's pretty cool.
Nice one, Cliff. Well, hey, so I think we did a good job of covering some of the major key. The things that people want to know, actually, and you've covered, the cognitive benefits, the benefits with sleep, the fact that you can get them in the doses that they're sold in. I think that's really important. So people don't need to, take out a second mortgage just to get what has been studied. I think that's another key sort of area. But I also really like your approach as well, it's not like this is a must-have that we should all be consuming. It's, include it for a various reason at some point or another, or, just sort of cycle through them to get some of those more broad-ranging benefits.
Yeah, don't you think, Mikki, that people have become way too serious about diet and supplementation?
Yes.
When I started out, maybe because there was so much less that we knew, but it felt like it was okay to experiment and have fun. Back in the 90s, we tried Atkins and we tried the Body Opus diet and all these sorts of things because we thought, why not? Give it a crack for a couple of months, see how you feel.
Totally. My favorite.
Whereas now
Body
people
for
are
life.
so, well, exactly. And I knew the guys very well behind Body for Life.
They were genius, man. Awesome.
Well, it's very simple, right? And it was very much a portions-based approach to nutrition wrapped up in a hyperbolic marketing scheme.
Oh, they did brilliantly. But you were so right about that, Cliff. And I think I laugh because I'm in week 2 of my Mondays Matter program with the whole crew and I love it and it's brilliant. But half of them are super concerned that they get, I accidentally had 186 grams of chicken tonight when it said 180 grams, like I've got people like that. And then I've got other people who are like, oh, thanks so much for this plan. Can I still eat exactly what it is that I've been eating and still lose weight?
Yeah.
You've got all ends of the spectrum when it comes to what people really, some people just want permission to eat what they've always eaten. And some people are a little bit hyper-focused on the things that aren't actually as important, but it's all learning, right? And I love it. I love being part of it.
Yeah, we need to do another podcast talking about some of the nuances of these things. Apologism for certain things, denial of others,
Yes.
a lack of pragmatism and fun in the industry.
Oh, well, hey, let's dial that in for before the end of 2024, Cliff. I'd love it.
Sounds good.
Amazing. So where can we just remind the listeners how they can connect either with you or with Holistic Performance Institute? That'd be amazing.
For the Holistic Performance Institute, and we do have a little course on functional mycology, which is the use of common mushrooms as supplements. So they can find that at holisticperformance.institute. And they can find my stuff, coaching and some plans and programs and whatnot at cliffharvey.com, because I'm just releasing a few kind of cool, really just sideline things. One of them is a Train With Me program, just because I write my own program every month.
Yes.
And I figured there might be some people, probably guys my age, who want to be a bit stronger and learn about physical culture and get some physical resilience and those types of things. So I figured I might as well post my training programs in an app with some supporting nutrition guidance and things like that, and people can just train along with me and see how it goes.
That's amazing, Cliff. I have one of the apps that I signed up for, and me, I do chaos theory when it comes to training. I just decide what I want to do on the day and then change my mind even halfway through a workout. But I still get in there 3 times a week. But I also follow someone's Train With Me app. I don't follow it. I use it for inspiration. And I love that idea. That is great that you're finally doing that. That's a really accessible way to work with someone like you, which is fantastic.
I didn't really have a lot of time to devote to that, but then I realized I was doing it all for myself anyway, so I might as well plug it in there, and then I can just support people as they're going through it. So we're going to do a little 20-rep squat challenge. Will be the next iteration of it coming out, which will be pretty cool. The old school 20-rep breathing squats that the old weightlifters and bodybuilders used to do back in the early half of the 20th century.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, bit of fun.
That sounds a bit of fun. All right, Cliff. Well, I will be keen to get an update on how that's going the next time we hook up to talk about that other super interesting topic, which I'm already excited about. So, as always, thanks so much for your time. Always appreciate you. And talk soon.
Thanks, Doc.
Alrighty, hopefully you really enjoyed that conversation. I, as you know, just bloody love talking to Cliff. So I'm always thrilled to get that opportunity to do it. Next week on the podcast, I speak to Dr. Michelle Wilson from Vitally Health about blood sugar management and continuous glucose monitors. Great conversation. Until then, though, you can catch me over on Instagram, Threads and Twitter, or X, at Mikki Williden, Facebook at Mikki Williden Nutrition, or head to my website, mikiwilliden.com. All right, team, you have the best week. See you later.